The old clock ticked softly on the wall, its rhythm marking each moment of her struggle. Ruth lay in her small bed, one hand pressed against her chest, the other clutching the blanket as though it could steady the pain pulsing through her body. Every breath was effort, every shift of weight a quiet cry. Her room smelled faintly of medicine and candle wax. The little lamp beside her bed cast a weak glow, just enough to reveal the deep lines carved by years of suffering. Outside, the night wind whispered against the window pane, but it brought no comfort, only the reminder that she was alone in her pain. She tried to pray, but her voice was weak. "Lord, please." The rest of the words never came. Her lips trembled, and her eyes filled with tears. Even prayer felt heavy now, like lifting something too large for her weary soul. Ruth closed her eyes and listened to the silence. It felt endless, pressing down on her chest harder than the pain itself. She wanted to believe God still saw her, but in nights like this, even faith seemed far away. She turned her face to the wall, whispering through a sob, "Jesus, I can't do this anymore." The words dissolved into the dark, like smoke disappearing into the wind. The next morning, Ruth sat on the edge of her bed, waiting for the light to rise. The house was silent, too silent. Once, she had filled these rooms with songs and the laughter of her children. Now, only the creaking of the old wooden floor answered her movements. Her late husband's chair still stood by the window facing the garden. She couldn't bring herself to move it. Sometimes, when the sunlight hit it just right, she could almost see him sitting there, smiling, humming softly as he used to. She shuffled through the kitchen to make tea. The kettle's whistle startled her, a small noise in the great emptiness. When she poured the tea, her hands shook slightly, spilling a few drops on the table. She didn't bother wiping them. Her days were a quiet loop: medicine, prayer, rest, and waiting. Always waiting. Every room carried echoes of what was gone, and though she tried to fill them with prayer, the silence always seemed to grow back, stronger each time. Ruth had long stopped counting the years since the pain began. Doctors had given it names she couldn't pronounce, all ending with the same conclusion: there's no cure, only management. She nodded politely each time, but inside she felt as though they were talking about someone else. It wasn't just her body that ached, it was her spirit too. The illness had become more than a condition. It was a presence that followed her everywhere. There were days when she could hardly stand. Others when she walked a few steps before collapsing into the nearest chair, gasping for air. Each moment of strength felt borrowed. Each smile, a small rebellion against her own frailty. She had once believed healing would come quickly, like light chasing away the night. But years had passed and the dawn hadn't arrived. Still, somewhere deep within her, a quiet ember refused to die. The faint belief that Jesus had not forgotten her, even if she couldn't feel him. That evening she sat by her bedside, the Bible open but unread. Her eyes scanned the page, yet the words blurred together. She sighed, closed the book, and pressed it against her chest. "Lord, I've asked you so many times." Her voice cracked, thin and trembling. "Why is it still so hard to breathe?" The silence answered with stillness, the kind of silence that stretches across years, patient, unchanging. She thought of the stories she used to read, of blind men seeing, of the lame walking, of the sick restored by his touch. Her heart longed for that same touch, but her faith felt fragile, like glass, ready to shatter at one more night of unanswered prayer. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't wipe them away. She simply let them fall, drop after drop, onto the open page. For the first time, she wondered if her pain would end only when she reached heaven. But deep inside, a small whisper, almost forgotten, told her, "Wait, he is not finished." The morning light came through Ruth's window, landing softly on the quilt her mother had sewn decades ago. She traced the faded patterns with trembling fingers, her mind wandering back to days when her body had obeyed her heart. She remembered walking to church every Sunday, her steps steady, her voice strong in the choir. She used to bake bread for her neighbors, laugh with her husband over morning coffee, lift her grandchildren into her arms as if they weighed nothing at all. Those memories were warm, yet they cut deep. They were pieces of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else, someone strong, someone healthy, someone she used to be. Now, each breath was a reminder of what she'd lost. She often wondered if the woman she once was had vanished completely, buried beneath years of illness and sorrow. But even as she remembered, a faint peace touched her heart, a gentle thought that maybe, just maybe, God had seen every moment of her pain and had kept all her tears somewhere safe. Her daughter called every few days, her voice full of concern but always rushed. "Are you taking your pills, Mom? Eating enough? I'll visit soon, I promise." Ruth would smile, whispering, "I'm fine, dear," though her hands trembled as she held the phone. Neighbors sometimes stopped by with flowers or soup, staying only a few minutes before returning to their lives. They spoke kindly, but with the distant tone of those who couldn't imagine her pain. Their presence filled the room for a while, then left it emptier than before. At night, when the house was quiet again, she would look at the ceiling and whisper, "No one really knows, do they?" It wasn't bitterness, just truth. Pain isolated her from the world. It made every sound far away, every joy belonging to others. In that distance, she began to sense how easily the suffering become invisible. Yet even in her loneliness, she felt a pull, as though someone saw what others couldn't. It was a question that lived in her chest for years, one she never dared to speak fully. But that night, as rain tapped against her window and pain throbbed in her joints, Ruth whispered it into the dark. "Why am I still here?" Her voice cracked with honesty. She wasn't angry, just tired. So tired of the endless cycle of pain and prayer, of long nights and longer mornings. She loved God, she truly did, but she longed to rest, really rest. Her gaze fell upon the small wooden cross by her bed. "If my time's not done," she said softly, "then please, show me why you keep me here." Her words hung in the air, fragile, trembling, real. And though no answer came that night, something stirred in the stillness, like the faint rustling of wings or the first breath of dawn before the sun breaks through. The pain returned stronger than before. It began in her back, spreading through her arms, stealing the air from her lungs. Ruth clutched the bedsheets, tears streaming down her face. The night was heavy, the darkness almost alive. She tried to sit, but her strength failed. Her breathing turned shallow, her body trembling from exhaustion. The clock ticked, cruel in its indifference. "Help me, Jesus," she gasped, her voice breaking under the weight of pain. "Please, help me." There was no long prayer, no verse, no strength left for words. Only that name, Jesus, repeated through sobs like a heartbeat in despair. And in that moment of weakness, her heart broke open completely. She wasn't praying to escape pain anymore. She was calling to be held in it. Her eyes closed, her body shaking. She waited for the silence to swallow her once more, but this time, something changed. The silence began to listen. The night outside had turned completely silent. Even the wind had stopped. Ruth lay motionless, her breath shallow, her heart caught between pain and surrender. For a moment, it felt as if time itself paused. The ticking clock, the distant hum of the world, even her thoughts, all was still. And in that stillness, a quiet presence began to fill the room. It didn't enter with noise or light. It simply was, soft, steady, near. Ruth didn't open her eyes at first. She just felt it, the faint warmth that brushed against her skin, the gentle hush that touched her spirit like a sigh from heaven. Her pain didn't vanish, but it eased enough for her to breathe again. Tears fell, not from fear, but from recognition. She had called his name, and something within her knew he had come. It began as a gentle pulse, warmth flowing through her chest, then slowly spreading, tender as light through fog. Her hands, once cold and trembling, began to relax. Her heartbeat steadied, her breath deepened. The warmth was not fire, it was comfort, not mere heat, but life itself. She felt it in her bones, in her weary muscles, in the hidden corners of her heart that had long forgotten what peace felt like. Her eyes fluttered open. The room was dim, yet everything seemed to shimmer faintly, as though invisible hands had touched each shadow with love. A whisper crossed her soul, not a voice, but a presence. She didn't hear words, yet she understood. "I am here, Ruth." Her tears flowed freely now. The pain had not disappeared completely, but it no longer controlled her. It bowed, quietly, before a greater power. As the night stretched on, Ruth realized the healing wasn't only in her body. Something within her, something deeper, had begun to awaken. For years, she had carried a quiet bitterness, buried beneath her prayers. Not anger at God, but disappointment. She had tried to accept her suffering, yet a part of her heart had grown numb. Now that numbness melted away. In its place came tenderness, fragile, yet alive. Her spirit, once heavy and tired, felt light again. She whispered, "You never left me, did you?" The silence that followed was warm and full, as if heaven itself had smiled. Her pain remained, but it no longer defined her. What defined her now was presence, a sacred companionship that spoke without sound. "You are seen. You are loved." Morning came quietly. Ruth awoke to birdsong and pale sunlight. For a moment she thought it had all been a dream, but when she sat up, her hand instinctively moved to her chest, right where the warmth had begun the night before. She could still feel it, not physically but in her spirit, a tender trace as if his touch had marked her heart forever. Her body still ached, yes, but the heaviness was gone. The pain had changed, no longer sharp, no longer cruel. It was bearable, surrounded by something she couldn't name except love. She smiled softly and whispered, "Thank you for coming." Her room looked the same. Old walls, the cross on her table, the quiet hum of morning. But she knew it wasn't the same anymore. Something sacred had passed through it, and stayed. The first light of dawn slipped across the floor, brushing against Ruth's worn slippers. She stared at them for a long time. For months they had stayed there untouched, reminders of the steps she could no longer take, but that morning felt different. There was a pull, gentle, quiet, as if someone whispered inside her, "Try." Her legs trembled as she turned to sit on the edge of the bed. The pain was still there, but it had changed. It no longer crushed her. It yielded to her will. Slowly, with both hands pressed against her thighs, she rose. Her breath caught, not from weakness, but from awe. For the first time in years, she stood without help. She stayed still, eyes glistening, afraid even to move in case the miracle dissolved. Then she took one step, and another. Each one felt sacred, like a prayer turned into movement. "Thank you, Jesus," she whispered through tears. "Thank you." Later that day, Ruth walked slowly through her home. The floors creaked beneath her feet, each sound a reminder that she was alive, truly alive. She touched the table, the chairs, the framed photos on the wall. Every object seemed to glow in a new light. Even her kettle, old and dented, looked like a gift. She brewed tea and carried the cup carefully to the window. The effort made her heart race, but she didn't mind. Each breath felt like grace. She whispered thanks for everything, for the warmth of the cup, for the view of the garden, for the strength in her legs, for the presence that had not left. Nothing had been taken from her now. Everything had been given back. Her gratitude filled the room like music, soundless, yet vibrant. 2 days later, Ruth's daughter arrived, expecting the same frail woman she had cared for months before. She carried groceries in one arm, worry in the other. When she opened the door and saw her mother standing near the kitchen window, she froze. "Mom," she whispered, as if afraid to break the moment. Ruth turned with a gentle smile. "I made tea," she said softly. Her daughter's eyes filled instantly with tears. She rushed forward, setting the bags aside, taking her mother's hands. "How? When?" Ruth only shook her head and answered, "He touched me." Her voice was steady, full of quiet certainty. Her daughter cried then, not out of sadness, but out of wonder. She could see it in her mother's face. Something holy had happened there, something that no medicine could explain. They sat together in silence, the kind that holds more meaning than words ever could. In the days that followed, neighbors began to notice the change. Ruth still moved slowly, still leaned on her cane, but her eyes had come alive. They shone with something unearthly, a light that came from somewhere far beyond her own strength. When asked how she was feeling, she would smile gently and say, "Better in the ways that matter." Her laughter returned, quiet, sincere, contagious. Even her doctor during a checkup paused and said, "You seem different." Ruth simply nodded. "I am." The pain hadn't vanished completely. Her body still reminded her of age and weakness. But her soul had been touched by eternity. It was no longer about healing she could measure. It was about peace she could feel. And that peace now lived behind her every word, every glance, every breath. Ruth never told her story to everyone. She didn't stand in church to testify, didn't try to explain what happened that night. She simply lived differently, quieter, softer, yet full of a kind of peace that drew others close. The young nurse from the clinic started visiting just to talk. Neighbors came by more often, saying things like, "There's something about you, Ruth. Being here feels good." She would only smile and pour tea, her wrinkled hands steady, her eyes filled with warmth. She didn't speak of miracles. She didn't need to. Her calm presence was enough. The way she listened, the way she blessed others simply by seeing them, it all carried the silent weight of grace. They came thinking they would comfort her, but each one left comforted, without quite knowing why. Her life had become a quiet testimony that Jesus still touches hearts, and his presence lingers through those who have been healed in soul. As the days shortened, Ruth began to cherish the evenings most. She would sit by her window, wrapped in a blanket, watching the sky turn gold, then pink, then soft grey. Each sunset felt like a promise that what began in darkness always ends in light. The pain in her body would sometimes return, but it no longer frightened her. She knew now that even pain could be holy when shared with him. Sometimes she spoke softly into the twilight. "I remember your touch, Lord, and I know you're still here." And somehow the air around her seemed to breathe in reply, a quiet warmth, a stillness that made her heart rest. The room, once her prison, had become a sanctuary. The walls that had held her tears now held peace. One morning as she made tea, a melody rose to her lips. It was a hymn she hadn't sung in years, the one she used to love most. "It is well with my soul." At first her voice cracked, uncertain, but then it grew steadier, sweeter. The notes filled her small kitchen, mingling with the sound of boiling water and birds outside her window. The song wasn't about her body anymore. It was about her heart. Every line carried a truth she now understood. Peace doesn't depend on what hurts or heals, but on who stays through it all. Tears came as she sang, but they were light, shining like morning dew. She lifted her gaze upward, smiling. "Yes, Lord," she whispered between verses, "it is well." Her song floated through the house. The same walls that had once held silence now trembled with praise. That evening the stars blinked softly outside her window. Ruth lay in bed, her Bible resting open beside her hand. The same verse she had once soaked with tears now seemed to shine differently. "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Her breathing slowed, deep and peaceful. The pain in her body was faint now, just a whisper of what it had been. Her soul, however, was radiant with calm. She smiled faintly into the darkness and whispered, "Thank you, Jesus, for touching me, here where no medicine could reach." As she drifted towards sleep, she felt it again, the same warmth, the same presence. Not distant, not gone, still there, always. And in that holy stillness, her heart rested in the hands that had healed it.